There you go. Hi, I'm Dr. Norris. It's great to be here today. Today we're going to talk about what I think is probably the one thing that has fundamentally changed how I lead, how I interact with patients, nurses, and even my own family. And we're going to talk about the model of human behavior. But first, since I kind of fly all over the country doing this, I thought I'd share this photo. This was on final approach in my plane yesterday. I spent 6 hours dodging thunderstorms and pop out and see a rainbow right out of there as I'm ready to intercept the final course into Page Field. So it's a lot of fun, and there are a lot of parallels between flying and anesthesia. But today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about relationships and how do we have better relationships, because we all have relationships, whether or not it's with our staff, coworkers, or patients, and even our family. And what we're going to, some of the topics we're going to discuss today are going to be self-awareness. We're going to talk a little bit about self-control, and then we're going to talk about some social awareness, and so how you can become a little more aware of those that you interact with on a daily basis. But really what we're talking about is we're talking about emotional intelligence. And first off, we're going to start with understanding ourselves first. And as Shakespeare said, all knowledge, the wise and good seek most to know themselves. And then once we're there, we can begin to understand other people. And after we talk a little bit about ourselves, we're going to talk about some tips and cues you can use to understand others. And as Dr. David Burns says from UPenn, the biggest mistake you can make in trying to talk convincingly to others is to put your highest priority on explaining your ideas and feelings. Honestly, what most people want is they want to be listened to, respected, and understood. The moment they begin to understand that that's what you're doing for them, they're going to become more motivated to see your point of view. And this becomes real important when we're leading others, we're building a team, we're negotiating. It's really important. And I'm going to give you some, hopefully at the end of this, you're going to have some tools that you can begin to use to really do that. So if you and I were going to meet at the bar later and we could hear ourselves like I couldn't last night, but if we're going to have a conversation, I'd ask you two questions. The first question is, what's your pace? All right, and I would probably, ask you, are you faster paced or slower paced? Do you go, or are you a little more reserved and take it a little easier? Do people have a hard time keeping up with you when you walk, or do you take it a little more slowly? And that's fine. There's not a real big difference or importance. You could be 51% fast or 49% slow, doesn't matter. The important thing is I want you to stop and think about, in most situations, am I faster paced? Do I go faster, or do I take it a little more slowly? Because if you're faster paced, you're probably a little more optimistic, you're more energetic, you're more positive and enthusiastic. And when you are faced with a problem, you typically focus on talking things out. Now, if you're a little more slower paced, you're a little more cautious, you're a little more concerned, a little more reluctant, a little more discerning, a little more critical thinking. And when you're faced with a problem, you tend to focus on thinking through the problem. And you want to spend time contemplating it rather than talking about it. Now, about 10 to 20% of the problems we face, I think, in life are along this axis, this question. Do we need to tackle the problem faster, or do we need to move a little more slowly, okay? So that would be the first question I would ask. What's your pace? The second one I would ask is, what do you focus on? All right. Are you more task-oriented, or are you more people-oriented? When you're faced with a problem, what's the first thing that pops in your mind? Is it more, what's the problem, what's the task that needs to be done, or who are the people involved and how do they impact that? And you can, I want you to stop, think for yourself. In most situations, do I usually more concerned with the task, or am I more concerned with the people? If you're more concerned with task, when you showed up at this this conference, you're more like, I'm going to learn about this, and this at this conference. If you're more people-oriented, we're thinking, oh boy, I'm going to see Dan, I'm going to see Sue, when we're going to have drinks, and it's going to be a great time. Okay? That's usually how those individuals will think of things. If you're more task-oriented, you really like procedures and functions and programs and projects, and you really focus on getting things done. And if you're on the other side and you're a little more people-oriented, you are more concerned about the relationships and the caring and the sharing and the emotions, feelings, and the friendships that you form. And you're more focused on the opinions of others and how they feel about the problem. Now, about 80 to 90% of the problems I think we face in life are along this axis. What's more important, getting things done or the people and the feelings and how they're being impacted? And I think the last 2 years have dramatically shown that debate versus task versus people, as we've just kind of, done the whole COVID thing. Now, it doesn't matter. We're all individuals, and there's no right answer here. You could be fast-paced, slower paced. You could be more task-oriented, more people-oriented. It doesn't really matter. That's who you are. But just pick one, because we're going to talk about what we call the 4 different personality styles. As you see, we've created a quadrant. So if you are fast-paced and task-oriented, you're what we call a D-type personality style. If you're fast-paced and outgoing, you're what we call an I. If you're an S, is if you're people-oriented and a little more reserved. And you're a C-type if you're a little more task-oriented and you're a little slower-paced. And we all have these distinctive personalities, if you will, things that in the way we view the world that will impact how we interact with others. So if you're more outgoing and task-oriented, you're the dominant type, you might be considered dominant. Another word would be direct. You're demanding. You can be very decisive and you can be very determined. These are doers. These are people who are very strong-willed and determined, very optimistic. They're very practical and productive. They can be brutally direct at times because they're going to get right to the point. They like a challenge to grow, and they tend to take the opinion where there's a will, there's a way, and I'm going to force it through. They like activities and bigness. They like challenges, and they like debate and doing things. They're very goal-oriented. They can be very intense and industrious and very self-confident. They do not like indecision. They don't like talk without action. They don't like activities without a goal. And they don't like slow activities, and they don't like being told what to do. And that can be a real problem, particularly if you're like me and who was a high D growing up. I was often labeled as defiant because I just didn't like being told what to do. So that can be a real negative with this personality style. Another word would begin with D, and it's another name for Richard, and a lot of people tend to think that Ds are that. The first question they ask when they are faced with a problem is, what's the problem? What needs to be fixed, and I'll get it fixed. Their fuel is they want results. They need results, okay? The way you reward a D is you give them another project. You give them another task to do, because that's how they get fuel in their daily and emotional lives, is seeing something happen, getting it done, and moving on, all right? Ds don't have plaques all over their walls, a greatest teacher award and all that stuff. They don't do that. That goes in a drawer, because that's not a task that they get. They look back and think of everything I've accomplished. Now, everyone has a big fear, and when we're dealing with Ds, they have a real fear of being taken advantage of. They don't want to be taken advantage of because that's one of their big fears. Now, if you're outgoing and you're people-oriented, you're what we call the I type. You're inspiring, influencing, impressionable, interactive, impressive, and involved. These people are very friendly, very compassionate, outgoing and talkative, very warm and enthusiastic. They have a lot of humor, and they're a lot of fun to be around. They're kind of the life of the party. They're very spontaneous. They like to be in big groups, and they like to be where the activity or the action is. They prefer short-term projects, and they quickly get bored, and they don't like being ignored or ridiculed. They don't like looking bad, and they don't really like repetitive steps. They say the saddest day of your parents' life, if you're in high I, is when you moved out, because all the fun moved out of the home. They say the happiest day of your parents' life is your D when you move out, is when you move out. That's their happiest day. They sometimes can come across as illogical. They typically ask who's involved, and how can I be involved in this project that makes me look good, because that's their fuel. They want recognition. That's what they seek in their social environments. Their biggest fear is looking bad. And I've seen that sometimes happen when they coach individuals who are high I's negotiating. They will take things or accept offers that because they don't want to look bad because maybe a promise they've made or something like that. But their biggest fear is looking bad. Now the S's, these are the individuals who are very reserved and very people-oriented. You can be said that they are supportive, they're very steady, they're very stable, very sweet, they like the status quo, and they can be quite shy. They're very calm and dependable. They're very easygoing individuals who are very efficient and conservative. They're very diplomatic. They like peace and stability and sincerity, loyalty, and they love to be on teams where they can cooperate. They don't like insensitivity. They don't like misunderstandings. They don't like surprises. If you're on a team and you're going to introduce something, and there's an S on your team, you're going to introduce that change differently to them than a D. A D, you would just say we're changing, is like, okay. But an S, they prefer a little more notice and they need more time to process those changes. Otherwise, they're going to put up roadblocks and resist that. And they don't like being pushed. Their biggest problem is sometimes they can come across as being a sucker because they have a hard time saying no to other people because they will subordinate their own personal needs to those of others because they value those relationships and they want everybody to feel and do well, even at their own cost. You know, my own mother was one of these, and she always had a hard time saying no. And, you know, we'd hear at the dinner table she's overstretched, but she could never say no because that's her personality style. Looking back, I realize that now. Their question they ask is how and when. When do you need me to help? How can I help? Their biggest fuel are relationships, and this is what they really focus on in the workplace or in their own personal life, is they really focus on the relationships. And if they have good, strong relationships, that's what motivates them to perform. Their biggest fear is conflict. They don't like conflict, and they will avoid it at all costs. They will shut down. They will change the subject. So if you're going to counsel one and give feedback, be careful. Do it slowly and gently, because otherwise they'll view that as a conflict, and they will shut down. Now, if you're a C type, and this is the last type, if you're task-oriented and reserved, you might be considered cautious, calculating, competent, conscientious, contemplative, and careful. These people are very calm, they're very analytical, almost perfectionistic. They're very loyal, and they're very, very thorough. These are the people that proofread photocopies. They like to plan for the future. They live by logic and principles, and they analyze the situation and the problem. They're gonna, if there's somebody that's going to draw a diagram of a process, it's going to be a C. Okay, they like excellent work and perfection and getting it right. They can be really hard to please because if everything's not just right the way they think it is, it can be quite challenging. They don't like being criticized. They don't like unnecessary interruptions. They don't like ambition without a plan. They got to see, why am I doing this that gets me over there? I mean, if you're going to change things, explain it to me. If it makes sense, I'll do it. But just when you change things without really explaining it to them, they'll shut off. And they'll look for ways to criticize and impede those changes, okay? They don't like mediocrity as well. And because they are so task-oriented and reserved, they can sometimes come across as being very cold. And we all know of those physicians who are just geniuses at what they do. And I do believe they genuinely care about their patients, but they just come across as being cold. And that's because that's the way their personality is geared, and they haven't really learned how to adapt their personality when they interact with others. Their first question when faced with a problem is why? Why do I need to do this? Prove it to me. And how? How are you going to do it? Their fuel is to be right. If you ever have one on your team, you know that they are going to argue with you and show that they're right or try and prove that you're wrong. And their biggest fear are illogical actions. So in some, we have the D type, which are the fast-paced, task-oriented individuals. We have the I type, which are the people-oriented and outgoing. The S type, they're a little more reserved and people-focused. And the C type, which are the slower-paced and task-oriented. If we're going to sum this up for a D, we'd say their thing is they want to get it done. I's want to get appreciated, S's want to get along, and C's want to get it right. Now, we all have all four of these we all have all four to various degrees and levels, but they all four are within us. About 10% of the population is what we would consider a high D, and that's because that's all the rest of the population would tolerate. About 25 to 35% of the people we're going to meet in life are going to be high I's. About 30 to 35% are going to be what we might categorize as a high S. And then about 20 to 25% of the population are going to be what we consider a C. And if you look at this, you'll see that about 45% to 55% or so of the population are faster paced, slower paced. Okay? And if you look at that task versus people, it's almost a 1-to-2 ratio. And I think that's why we have much more conflict on what's more important, task versus people, versus having more evenly split on pace. So where do you fit in? Just write that down. Am I faster paced, slower paced? Am I task-oriented, or am I people-oriented? And really begin to think about some of those traits, and does that apply to you? Because how you interact with others is now your responsibility. Just because you might have a certain personality style, I as a D can come across as very abrupt, very harsh. Over the years, I've learned I need to tone that way down. And sometimes it's hard. But you have to do that. Same with an I. So we're going to talk about some self-management keys. All right. So if you're a D, remember, people are important. And relaxation and having fun is not a crime. I early on in my career, that was my biggest thing. And I was like, I didn't ever want to go do anything fun because I had other stuff to get done. And playing golf seemed dumb. Still seems dumb, but I found another hobby to do. But relaxation is important. Now, some controls are necessary, all right? As a pilot, ATC, they have rules that I have to follow. And those really are for safety of me and everyone else up in the air. I can't just go up there and do whatever I want to do. Some controls are necessary. Now, also, everyone has a boss. It doesn't matter if you are a big shot surgeon or you're a big shot anesthesiologist or whoever you are. Everyone has a boss. I've had one for 22 years, okay? So everyone has a boss. And then finally, verbalizing conclusions will help others understand them better. Sometimes Ds go so fast that they jump from point A to point D, and they don't really explain how we got to B and C, and they don't understand why people don't get it. So just slow down a little bit and verbalize those conclusions. Now with I's, time's got to be managed. Too much optimism can be harmful. Listening is very important, and tasks have to be completed, and accountability is imperative. Now, this is one of the things I had to deal with a lot early on with my daughter. She's a high I. And I had to, for me, it was like, hey, get your homework done. It's not that hard, They assign it, you know what it is, and you just do it and check it off. That's not the way she wanted to roll. And so very early on, I realized I would need to talk with her differently, and I needed to give her different encouragement. And I also realized that since she was so very different from me, I needed to talk to her more as an I. So when I'm around her, I have to be more energetic. When I'm around her, I try to be more fun. I don't know if that's possible for a father. But I mean, those are the sort of things. In order to form that really strong relationship with her, those are the things that I made a conscious effort at doing. Now, if you're an S, remember, change provides opportunity. Change can be good. Friendship isn't everything. It's great to have friends, but there are some friends that you probably don't need. And sometimes you just need to let somebody else suffer the consequences of their decisions rather than you taking ownership for that. Discipline is good. It's okay to say no. It really is. It really is okay for you as an S to say no to someone else's request. You don't need to carry the world on your shoulders. You're not Atlas. And then, being a servant doesn't mean being a sucker. It's one thing to help people through their problems. It's another to take personal responsibility for it. And S's get caught in that trap. Now, if you're a C, I want you to remember total agreement isn't always necessary and often isn't even possible. Thorough explanations are not always possible. Deadlines have to be met. Sometimes you make the best decision you can with the data you have and move on. Taking calculated risks can be profitable, and then there are varying degrees of excellence. So let's talk a little bit about relationships and how we can apply this to our daily lives. So there are tests available where you can take these tests and it will show you what your personality style is. And this is me, all right? You'll see anything above this red line represents a strong personality, or you're high on that. So we would call me, I'm a high DC. I'm very, very task-oriented. And I'm kind of evenly split. Sometimes I'm fast, sometimes I'm slow. What you notice here is the D and the I, anything over here, that's our pace. That's our faster pace. And over here on the S and the C's, those are our slower paces. And then here, the D and the C, these are our task-oriented, and in the middle are our I and S, which are our people-oriented. So this is me. This is my wife. All right. So we kind of connected together, and we kind of see eye to eye on a lot of things because we both have a C. But there are things that she does that drives me nuts. And I learned early on in life that I could either try and change her, which isn't possible, or I could just accept her for who she is, and then I can adapt to her. And it made the marriage a lot better. So I'll give you an example. A while back, I was working on a manuscript, and we were getting a front step report. And she came down. Now, you'll see that the S's, the reserved people, they don't really like conflict. They're not really aggressive. And so she came down and said, the guys that are doing the step are here. Do you have any questions? I'm like, no, I don't have any questions. What's the job? The job is to fix the step. Report. What questions could there be? And she stopped and said, are you sure you don't have any questions? And that's when I kind of pulled my head out of my work and said, what questions would you like me to go ask? I went and asked the questions, and then I came back down. Before I learned this, I probably would have fought with her a little bit and said, what can't you go ask the questions? Why do I have to go ask the questions? But instead, it took me no more than 5 minutes, but I realized what she really wanted based on her personality style, and it didn't become a point of contention. It didn't become a fight. This is my son. My son and I are almost twins. We get along great. We see eye to eye on a lot of things. But I raise him differently than my daughter. My son, since we see eye to eye together, I say, Jacob, bedtime's at 9. Be in your room at 9. I don't care what you got to do before then, but bedtime's 9. And, I just give him that decision, or I tell him that that's the thing, and he would make his own decision and then put himself to bed at 9. I just kind of set some parameters. I don't have to micromanage this child. Is your homework done? No, homework's done like 3 chapters ahead with my son. But that's his personality style. Now, my daughter, she's the odd one out. Look at that. She's a high I. And then every one of us, we're very low on I's. We're not real outgoing. So when we will go on family vacation, she wants to go do all these other things, and then the other 3 of us are like, I don't know, that doesn't sound as much fun. But since everyone in the family knows each other's personality styles, we adapt, and we don't get rigid, and we say, okay, yeah, we'll go do that for you, sure. And she also knows that we do things a little differently. We're not as fast-paced, and it's adapting and seeing her in that light has really fundamentally changed how I relate to these two children, and also how their personality styles impact how they view my behaviors, okay? When I was writing an article for a magazine, I had a paragraph I just didn't like the way it was working. And so I was at my computer, and I had the kind of a furrowed brow trying to think about how I wanted to word it. My son comes down and says, "Hey, Dad, it's nice out. The kids are going to the park. Can I go?" And I said, "Sure, that's fine." And he said, "Well, what are you thinking about?" And I said, "Well, there's this issue with this paragraph. I can't get it right." And he's like, "Okay, well, good luck with that, Dad," and then took off. A little while later, my daughter comes down. I'm still kind of in the same facial expression. She comes down and says, "Hey, Dad, what are you angry about?" Okay. She interpreted it completely different than my son, and that is based upon their personality style. So, when I'm a physician and I'm in PACU giving orders, the nurse on the other side will receive the way I give that order differently. They're going to perceive some stuff in there that might not be there intentionally. So I have to adjust how I talk to them such that they don't think I'm the jerk that I probably am. But that's real important, because how we see things. And as a D, when I see somebody that's going real slow or stumbling and bumbling, I find that real annoying. And then I have to remember, is this me or is it them? And most of the time it's me and my perceptions of them. So we'll take me for an example. So I really connect with people who are high I's and high C's, okay? Because I share something in common. I share a pace, a motor. I share a focus, all right? The people I have the hardest time relating to are the people that are right across the quadrant from me, the high S's. My mother-in-law is a very high S, and when we first started dating, not my mother-in-law, my wife and I started dating, her mother-in-law, oh my God, my mother-in-law, it just would drive me nuts. And it wasn't until I began to really think about, well, what's her personality style? She's a high S. And it used to drive me nuts. We'd get ready to go out to dinner, right? And we'd say, "Where do you guys want to go out to dinner?" And she would say, "Well, does anybody want to go try the new Mexican restaurant?" And we're like, nah. And she'd get shot down, and she wouldn't fight. And we go someplace else, and at the end of the evening, it might come up, "Well, I really wanted to go to that Mexican dinner." And it used to irritate me, like, "Well, why didn't you just say so?" Well, she did. I just didn't recognize it. Because she's not going to push her opinions or what she wants on someone else because of her personality style. So now, when she says, "Does anyone want to go try that?" I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds good. We should do that." Okay? Because that's how she expresses what she wants. And if you think about people that you work with in the OR, you're going to find all of these personality styles in the OR. You're going to find a circulator, a scrub tech, or one of you, or an anesthesiologist who are like one of these personality styles. And if you're having conflict with them, I want you to stop and think about, what am I and what do I think they are? And am I having an issue with how I'm perceiving their their behaviors? Because what we want to do is we want to build rapport with this. And why is that? Because once we can get to connection and understand where they're coming from, we can more effectively communicate and speak their language. And then once we can communicate, then we can really get them to comply. And this has become, I've used this in family practice clinics, where physicians who, we've done some personality testing of their patients, they come in and the physician kind of changes those instructions and changes that interaction so that patient now fully understands what they're doing, and he understands this patient, they're going to write everything down. I don't need to give them a handout. But this patient, I need to give them written instructions, all right? And that's really improved their relationships. Because remember, everyone is different, all right? What's natural for you may take effort for others, okay? Just because it's easy for you doesn't mean it's always easy for someone else. You're just gifted. And what energizes you may demotivate others. How we recharge and want to take breaks, that's very different based on our personality style. My son, when he's on vacation or on break, what does he want to do? He wants to read books. He wants to play chess and do things that are more, inside his mind. My daughter, she wants to go out and play. She wants to go to the barn with her friends and ride horses, or she wants to go to the mall or whatnot. That's how she re-energizes, is when she's tired, she wants to go out and do social things because she's a high I. My son, the C, is the opposite. And that's fine. That's perfectly normal. And if I fought my son saying, "Jacob, you need to go out and do these things," he and I would butt heads and nothing would be accomplished, I don't think. And my daughter, if I tried to make her sit and read a book, she might get some pushback on that, because that's not always how she re-energizes or recharges her batteries. Now, some people are very good at multitasking, and some are, you just got to do one thing at a time. Some prefer to work alone and isolate and retreat, while others, they want and need that discussion and dialogue to stimulate them. And when they interact and engage with others. Some people are very fast-paced, and some are very slow-paced, like we've already talked about. And we got to be aware of that when we talk with them. Now, if you're going to do business, be in a relationship, or do anything with these individuals, you're going to approach them differently. So with a task-oriented person, they got to trust you first before they like you and do business with you. And for most task people, they're going to say, I will trust you when you prove I can. I'm going to look at your results. Do you do what you say you're going to do? Is the evidence there? Yes, it is. Okay, I trust you. Now we can begin this relationship, okay? That's very different than a people-oriented individual. They must first like you before they want to do business with you. And if they don't like you, they're not going to want to do any business with you. For people-oriented people, they'll trust you until you prove you can't, but they have to like you. And they're going to judge whether or not they like you, not only based on how you treat them, but they're going to look and see how you treat others, and they're going to watch that very carefully. And that's how they will determine whether they like you. And if they like you, then they'll do business. If they don't, they won't. So as we build up what we call this ladder of rapport, on the task side, we start, it's got to go trust, then the relationship. And on the people side, it's relationship, then trust. And we really, since we have all four of these in us, it's real important that we begin to use these. Because at the beginning of any conversation or relationship, it really should start with listening. And that really is the supportive, the us-type personality style. And we need to really focus in on hone on those skills so that we can really listen. And then after that, we need to observe what's going on, what's being said, how it's being said. And that comes from the C that we have in us. And then we need to be more discerning, and that comes from our D. And then when it's our turn to talk and to interact, we need to speak from our I. We need to be energetic. We need to be outgoing and not be afraid to speak. Now, there are a couple danger zones, another pitfall, if you will, that some of us have. Now, Ds, they are prone to decide before they get all the information. They'll just, because they just want to go, they'll say, oh, that's what we're doing, and that's what we're doing. And they might not make the best decision, but they're just going to make a decision and move on. And so they can be real prone to deciding before they get all the information. I's will often interrupt the other individual before waiting, before it's really their turn in that interaction or that conversation. S's tend to spectate and kind of sit on the sidelines and not necessarily be real involved. And if you ever have somebody in a meeting and they're not saying anything, I'm going to guess they're probably an S. And if that's the case and you really want to hear their opinion, gently ask them for their opinion in front of everyone. They'll give it to you, but they're not going to just say, this is what I think. They're going to spectate more. And then C's, they're likely going to criticize the value of the information. They're going to look for areas where they think things are wrong. And when we have some complete and perfect rapport, that's where we have the exchange of information and opinions. We have active engagement in the communication. When we communicate, we're going to use all four of these together. And remember, each person is their own blend. Now, there are some things that will hinder us from effectively communicating. And these are some attitudes that, if this is your particular personality style, you've got to be real careful when we're interacting with others. And D's, like I said, you tend to make your mind up real quick, and then you don't change because you've already moved on to the next thing. And you tend to jump to conclusions rather quickly. So as a D, I would encourage you to tap the brakes and slow down and really spend time fully thinking about what's going on, what's being said, and drop below to that, that slower paced, task-oriented personality traits. I's, They tend to daydream from time to time. It's usually a squirrel with eyes, and that happens with my daughter. I swear to God that happened. We were about bike riding about 8 years ago. She's telling me the story and sees a squirrel, literally squirrel. And I just laughed because, that's your personality style. You need to eliminate the distractions in your life so that you can really focus on what's going on. S's, sometimes they'll develop selective hearing because they'll filter out things they don't want to hear that might be related to something bad or conflict or anything. And they'll shut down sometimes as they begin to process because they're like, okay, that's too much. I have so much information I can take in. I'm going to shut down now. And I'm going to process what we've gone over. If you have more, come back later. And they will sometimes try and change the subject or procrastinate because they don't like the topic, and it can be real hard for you if you're trying to lead them to get them on task. Now, C's, you look for specific things that are said in general, and then you kind of postulate from there, sometimes inappropriately, and then they try and remember too much detail, and they'll focus on one word or concept that might be incorrect, and if it's incorrect, well, then the whole thing is wrong, so they throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. Now, there are some obstacles that will keep others from listening to you. So this is if you are talking to someone else, things you need to think about when you are talking from this personality style. Or they're listening, you're talking to them, I mean. So they usually want you to get to the point, So they quit listening. D's will quit listening once they've determined the information is useless. So you've only got a couple seconds with a D. And we all have those in our lives where, hey, I want to talk to you about this. And about 10 seconds later, they've already said, this is not worth my time, moving on. Okay? So if you're going to know that you're going to approach someone like that, get right to the point, all right? And don't dilly-dally on making your point. Don't be all warm and fuzzy with a D. Just say, this is what we need to do. This is why we need to do it. And they're like, okay. With an I, they typically are going to think about how they can get attention. They're going to tune out boring conversations, and they're easily distracted by the environment. So when you're wanting to talk to an I, be a little more energetic, and if they're in a big area or they're in an environment that could easily be distracted, maybe you choose a different environment to have that more meaningful conversation with them, okay? S's, they can lose the speaker's train of thought, and like I said, they will shut down not only in response to information or topics, but even the tone of your voice can impact how an S will react to you. And really what you want to do is you want to slow down just a little bit when you talk to them, a little quieter, softer voice. And then with the C's, they'll stop listening as soon as they judge you no longer worthy to be listened to. And they'll do that quite quickly. And sometimes they'll try and run ahead of you in your talk, and they'll try and figure out, well, the logic seems to be going this way, and I'm just going to jump to the point and beat them in the conversation. And just know that with a C, you're going to want to lay everything out step by step. Because they're always, you're going to need to know that you're right with a C when you approach them. Like, this is why we need these protocols or whatever. It's A, B, C, and D. Boom. Okay. Now, with leadership, there's more to it than meets the eye. And really, what leadership is, it's a blend of all these styles when we lead others and work with others, okay? And when we're talking about our emotional intelligence, it's that self-awareness, knowing who we are. It's understanding and controlling our own actions such that we aren't, our actions and behaviors aren't misunderstood by the others. And having those disciplined actions. It's social awareness, and knowing how to read others, and knowing, kind of getting an idea of what really motivating them. How might they interpret how I say this? And then it's that social skill, and that's connecting with others. Now, just because you might be a high D or a high I or a C or an S doesn't mean you can't be a great leader. We all, honestly, as I've gone through many projects in the hospital, you need a little bit of every little bit of these to really effectively make change in any large organization. So D's, D's are going to lead from the front, okay? They're going to say, this is what we need to do, follow me. And that's good at times in that project. Then there are other times you might need to shift gears a little bit and be more like an I, where you lead inspirationally and you lead kind of from the middle of the pack. And you say, hey guys, this is good stuff, we need to do this. And then sometimes in that project, you might need to shift. And you need to lead it from an S style, more from the back, and more supportive, and saying, what do you need? What materials, what support can I give you to help you so that we get this project done? And then C's, they lead from the side, right? And we need those folks that make certain we're following these guidelines, or we're making this protocol, or our every step is being done the way it needs to be in order to make this a better place. So just because you're one of these personality styles doesn't mean you can't be a leader. And in fact, there are many personality styles that, all four of them can be very, very strong leaders. And the best leaders know when they need to tap into those different personality styles. What do I need to tap in now in order to push this group forward? Now, what's interesting is a friend of mine had me do this for his company. And he was having issues with his people, and there was there were two camps, basically. There was the fast-paced people. These guys up here, they would all go out and have fun after a convention. He's a financial analyst and things like that. So all his people up here would go out and have fun, go to dinner and parties, while these four people below that line would stay home or stay in the relax in their rooms or go someplace quiet. And it was causing a lot of strife between his people. So we tested them, and what we found was that this is how they react in the workplace. But if we looked at them in their natural place, if they weren't under the influence of the job, this is really how they would be. And they're far more diverse, far more spread out. And what happened is that all these people that were up over here, some of them they would shift from here to there at the workplace, but then they'd come back here at home. And after we got done with the workshop, the day-long workshop, all these individuals understood that's why you do what you do. That's why when I said that the other day, you got angry or you didn't. We had a little fight about it. Is because I approached you incorrectly. And what had happened is, after we did this workshop and his people really began to live this, and they began to understand that, JPs here need to talk differently to CH, and that's okay, their productivity went through the roof. So this is real stuff, and it does apply in the workplace, as well as your personal life. So, in summary, remember, you have the D type, the I type, outgoing, people-oriented, the reserved, people-oriented, S type, and the C type that are cautious, that are or reserved and or task-oriented. Remember, D's, they want results. I's want recognition. S's, they want relationships. And C's want to be right. So where do you fit in? Those two questions are going to give you a pretty good idea where you're going to start from. And when you get home, your family, your friends, your loved ones, ask them those two questions. And then you can begin to piece together, this is why we have conflict, or maybe this is why you and I get along so great. This is why, my brothers get along pretty great, and me and them, we weren't so hot growing up. It's because of different personality styles. But now that I understand that, I've been able to go back and make those relationships stronger. So this is powerful stuff. So a final thought, you can't change other people. The only person you can change is yourself. And now that you know this information, you can now begin to change how you interact with others, okay? When in doubt, start with people and then move to task. And in fact, you probably always ought to do that, because you never know who's on the other side. And about 2/3 of the population are going to be people-oriented. And it might be as simple as, hey, I hope you're having a great day, with a smile. Or something like that, an email, happy Wednesday, okay? Start with the little people and then move to task. I do that every day in the prep. How's it going? I start with the little people and then I get right to task. Because that's what I'm about. I'm about task. I'm about getting you to sleep and waking you up, okay? But I need to start with people because I need you to like me so that you trust me, okay? These are not labels, okay? You don't go around saying they're a D, they're a C, whatever. More importantly, these are not excuses. Just because I'm a high D doesn't give me license to be a prick, okay? I wish it did, but it really doesn't. And so these are not excuses. And you can't just say, I'm a high S and people are going to walk all over me, or I'm a C so I can just be cold and calculating. No. Now that you know this, now you know how to change your behavior. So if you'd like to learn more, you can visit my website at davidnorrismdmba.com/disc. Here's my email if you ever have any questions or anything. And then finally, here's my phone number. If you have questions, you can call, text. If you need help with this sort of thing, I'm more than happy to do that for you. Of everything I teach and everything I've learned, this has been probably the most powerful stuff I've ever learned. It's very simple, but it's very easy to apply, and it will dramatically improve your business and personal relationships. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned something.